In 1830 in the Tasman Sea, a ship struggles to sail while Thomas Monro, a lay preacher, calms his horse. The other men bring in the body of a man who has been shot. Monro decides to go up on deck to see what is happening. Just then, a flood of water enters the ship and pours onto Monro, making him think twice about going back up, so he stays below. The next morning, the storm has calmed, and Kedgley gathers everyone aboard for a funeral for the dead man. Monro is asked to give the benediction, in which he claims that only those who have been at sea truly grasp the enormity of the world and its vast distances. He reflects on the frightening realization of one's own insignificance. He also says that most men would flinch from this knowledge, yet they are compelled into the vacant spaces of the earth, knowing that one day, at some unforeseen hour, a great price might be demanded of them. After his short speech, the body is dropped into the sea. Later that night, while Monro is working, Kedgley shows up and praises Monro for his eulogy to the sailor. Kedgley believes Monro's words and actions speak of a man who has seen something of the world. Monro reveals that he is from a family of shipbuilders. The next morning, Monro is busy sketching Wuku when Kedgley shows up again. He looks at the sketch and tells Monro that the boy belongs to royalty. Kedgley then calls Wuku, giving him the wheel of the ship and instructing him to take them 3 points to starboard. Wuku successfully does so, and Kedgley applauds him. Just then, a man shouts that he sees land. After asking Wuku about the nearest safe anchorage, Kedgley instructs the crew to go ashore, find some timber, and replace the topgallant. Everyone stops to watch Monro using his horse to come ashore. Later, Wuku examines his drawing and asks Monro about it. Monro then asks about the whale tooth that Wuku is wearing and the marks on his face. Wuku explains that the whale tooth represents the voice of his father's god, while the marks on his face tell the story of his life so far. Meanwhile, Kedgley and the others head into the forest to look for timber. There, Monro encounters a girl named Rangi who is holding a weapon. Initially, Rangi seems unfriendly, but when she sees that Monro is unarmed, she approaches him and pets his horse. Suddenly, several other aggressive men show up ready to attack Monro. Kedgley arrives just in time and rescues Monro from the situation. Kedgley explains that they didn't mean any disrespect by trespassing. Kedgley asks the men for wood for repairs. Initially, the men demand Monro's horse, but they eventually settle for an axe in exchange. Later, Monro wants to set up camp until the ship is ready to sail again. He claims that if he's going to live in this country, he needs to acquaint himself with it. Kedgley is against the idea at first, but agrees after some convincing and decides to leave Wuku with Monro, although Wuku is nowhere to be found. As Monro explores the area on his horse, he admires the beauty of the place. He then lies down to take a nap, but soon hears a woman screaming in the distance. Monro wakes up as the screaming intensifies and hears a gunshot. He discovers that 2 tribes are fighting, brutally killing each other. One tribe is where Wuku belongs and the other is Rangi's. Akatarewa asks Monro what he wants. Monro requests that the lives of the people be spared. Shortly after, Kedgley arrives with his men. Akatarewa thanks Kedgley for teaching his son, and Kedgley asks him to spare Monro's life, as Monro is supposed to be delivered to Epworth. However, Monro is determined to save Rangi and her husband. Akatarewa asks what Monro has to offer in exchange for their lives, and Monro proposes his horse, but Akatarewa declines, saying, "1 horse, 1 life," and tells him to choose one or the other. Unable to choose, Monro watches in horror as Akatarewa gives the order to kill Rangi's husband in front of her. This devastates Rangi, and before she can do anything rash, Akatarewa tells Monro to take her away before he decides to kill them both. Monro brings Rangi back onto their ship, allowing her to use his room and providing her with some food. The next day, they arrive in the remote settlement of Epworth in New Zealand and is welcomed by Mr. Beauchamp. They both spend the night at the lodges, while Rangi grieves the death of her husband. The next morning, Monro checks on Rangi and then goes to the chapel, where he meets Reginald, who invites him to dinner. Back at the lodges, Monro finds Rangi sick. It turns out she's badly injured. Monro tends to her wounds before heading out for dinner. During their conversation, he learns that the land has been rented by a local chieftain, Maianui, who is not considered a threat. Reports indicate that a warlord is launching assaults against other tribes and claiming their lands. Monro is convinced that the warlord is Akatarewa. He recounts the story of Rangi, whose husband was brutally killed on Akatarewa's orders. The people are worried that with Akatarewa moving south, the future of the colony becomes uncertain. Monroe then asks the doctor to treat Rangi, but the doctor refuses, claiming they have very limited medical supplies reserved for the people of Epworth. Before departing, Bethany mentions a woman named Charlotte who might be able to help Rangi. Monroe seeks out Charlotte and describes Rangi's infected wound. Initially, Charlotte turns him away, but later that night she arrives at his door to see her. Surprisingly, Charlotte recognizes Rangi. After tending to her wounds, she prepares a drink called kawakawa and recites a Maori incantation before leaving. The next day, Charlotte returns to care for Rangi, who thanks her for her healing. Later, Monroe hears a loud bell and notices armed men rushing towards the shore. Just then, Rangi rushes outside, chanting and walking towards her tribe, who have come to take her back. It turns out the leader of the tribe is Rangi's father, Maianui. Rangi confronts her father about seeking revenge and asks which one of them has the head of the murderer. Maianui comforts Rangi before executing Akatarewa's men, despite knowing they are not responsible for killing her husband. Charlotte then introduces Monroe to Maianui, explaining that Monroe is the holy man for the people of Epworth and the one who not only saved his daughter, but also returned her to good health. Hearing this, Maianui decides that Rangi should stay in Epworth to be tutored by Monroe. Before leaving, Maianui asks Pahira to stay with Rangi to guard her. After some time, Monroe arrives at the chapel to spread the word of God. Soon, the chapel fills with people, and Monroe begins with a hymn while Rangi and Pahira stand in the back watching in silence. In the chapel, people applaud Monroe for his service before leaving. Later, Monroe, along with Rangi and Pahira, meets Mr. Paget, intending to preach to him. However, Mr. Paget does not seem to care about the chapel or Monroe's interpretation of the gospel. He claims that he's stuck in a trap, thousands of miles away from civilization, surrounded by savages, with no way out except through fire and blood. Later, Rangi is in the forest with Charlotte, dancing and playing around. Meanwhile, back in the chapel, Pahira seems to have developed a liking for Bethany, but her father is not happy about it. He talks to Monroe and argues that the difference in their beliefs is too vast to be reconciled. That night, Bethany meets Pahira in the chapel, and they share an intimate moment. The next morning, Monroe is with Rangi and Pahira when Rangi sees a pinned notice about an upcoming dance ceremony and shows interest in participating. Rangi has also learned to understand and speak English. That evening, Charlotte helps Rangi dress up nicely for the dance. However, the British are not pleased to see Rangi. Everyone stares awkwardly as the two dance. Upon returning, they find Pahira brutally killed in the chapel. Angered, Monroe confronts the British, and they promise to find the culprit while Rangi mourns his death. Later, after beating him to a pulp, Mr. Paget is forced to confess and is held responsible for Pahira's murder, even though he denies hurting anyone. In the meantime, Rangi and Charlotte prepare Pahira's body to be sent back to the tribe. Soon, Bethany arrives and insists on seeing Pahira one last time. Bethany places her hand on his chest and sobs in grief. Charlotte and Rangi accompany Monroe to deliver Pahira's body back to his tribe. Before they leave, Monroe learns that Mr. Paget was found dead in his cell, apparently having taken his own life out of remorse. Harris wants Monroe to tell Maianui that justice has been done on behalf of his people, but Monroe refuses, knowing that Mr. Paget was framed for the murder. After walking miles, they stop for the night, where Monroe sketches Rangi. Upon asking, he learns that Charlotte's husband was killed in battle, and as a Paka woman alone, she had to live with the British. Soon, they arrive at the Maori tribe, and the natives mourn Pahira's death. Surprisingly, Monroe is met with an impressive amount of understanding when he apologizes to Maianui for not being able to keep Pahira safe. As a punishment for the Epworth people, Monroe suggests that Maianui raise their rent rather than resort to more bloodshed. Later, Monroe explores the area and makes several sketches of people performing routine tasks, such as eating and working. While talking to Charlotte, he learns more about the Maori tribe. Suddenly, he hears several gunshots, drops his sketchbook, and rushes to see what's happening. Monroe discovers that the Maori themselves are responsible for the shooting. He is surprised to see them using British-pattern muskets. While looking through Monroe's sketchbook, Rangi sees many images of death. When asked about it, Monroe reveals the truth behind his haunting memories. Before he found faith and devoted himself to kindness and peace, Monroe had a life-changing experience as a British soldier. He was ordered to kill a group of people without hesitation, simply for not wearing red uniforms. The horrific sight of women and children who had taken refuge in a school, being covered in blood, deeply traumatized him. Monroe wanted God to punish him, but instead, he turned to the Christian belief in redemption and decided to atone for his sins by doing good deeds. He hopes that sharing his story of regret will touch Mayanui and his people. However, he doesn't fully understand the Mayanui view on such matters. For them, true redemption comes through revenge. After comforting Monroe, Charlotte and he spend the night together. Monroe notices scars on her back, and Charlotte shares her story of how she ended up at Epworth. She reveals that she was transported to Botany Bay for stealing flour and yeast, but was rescued by a Maori tribe. However, the ship carrying her was attacked, ransacked, and burned, and everyone was killed. Charlotte was spared because she saved one of the warriors from the pigs, who turned out to be Mayanui's brother. She became his wife. The next morning, Monroe watches as the tribe prepares to defend themselves against Akatoriwa. He then notices Kedgley selling guns to the Maori. Monroe explains to the Maori that they must make peace with Akatoriwa, otherwise, their children will have no future. He promises to talk to Akatoriwa, but Mayanui is convinced that Akatoriwa won't listen and challenges Monroe to go to Akatoriwa and convert him to the god of peace. If Monroe succeeds, the Maori will also follow his god. Later, Monroe meets Kedgley and confronts him about his selfish business of selling muskets to the Maori. He accuses Kedgley of being solely interested in making money and exploiting the tribe's emotions surrounding their wars. The next morning, Monroe heads over to meet and convince Akatoriwa. When he arrives, he finds Rangi hiding inside the cabin. Monroe believes that the same approach that convinced Mayanui will work on Akatoriwa and presents Mayanui's offerings. However, he fails to understand the key differences between the tribes. Akatoriwa is a warlord with unique responsibilities and views mercy as something to be exchanged. Not only does he reject Monroe's peace offer, but he also kills Kedgley for trying to deceive him by increasing the price of the muskets. The situation descends into chaos, resulting in several men being killed on both sides. Just then, Rangi arrives and saves Monroe from a man trying to kill him. It turns out that the man was the same one who had killed her husband. Soon after, they managed to flee on Monroe's horse. Meanwhile, Akatoriwa and his people hijack Kedgley's ship. When confronted by Monroe, Rangi explains that revenge and death go hand in hand. The next morning, Monroe and Rangi arrive at the Maori tribe and inform Mayanui that the ship hijacked by Akatoriwa could transport many warriors. Soon, the ship arrives with Akatoriwa and his men, ready for war. They begin shooting their cannons at the village, causing chaos. During the all-out battle, Charlotte helps Monroe reload the weapons, but is struck by a bullet that pierces her chest. This devastates Monroe, who charges forward, killing several men before Rangi intervenes to stop him. In a surprising turn, Mayanui's army, despite being outnumbered and facing tough challenges, triumphs over the formidable Akatoriwa through clever strategy, deep knowledge of their battleground, and a strong resolve to defend their ancestral land. Akatoriwa runs ashore and accepts defeat, showing his true bravery. He looks Mayanui in the eyes one last time before being given a warrior's death. However, his son Wuku is spared as a sign of peace between the two tribes. An elder suggests a union between the tribes. 4 years later, Monroe, Wuku, and Rangi, now Wuku's wife, arrive at Epworth to meet a British king's representative. He informs them that His Majesty is aware of the tribe's support for Epworth and the trade routes established up and down the coast. He then warns them about a plan to designate a customs and excise post in Epworth to oversee trade in and out of the area. However, Monroe, now a council member of the Maori tribe, asserts that the king has no rights to the land. Monroe states that the people are willing to let them stay, but His Majesty must double the rent to appoint a customs and excise post in Epworth, which silences the men. They notice the traditional marks on Monroe's face and ask about them. He tells them that they represent the story of his life so far. See you in our next film flash. Thank you for watching.